Hi, in this video we're going to be looking at pollination and how to improve pollination in your orchard. And we're going to be looking at the main steps you can take to really get the pollinators working for you. So we're going to be looking at why pollination matters and what actually happens. To get any fruit in your orchard, you have to have pollinating insects. And most people think it's just honeybees that do the pollination, but in fact there is a whole range of different insects involved with pollinating, moving pollen onto flowers between different trees and getting the fruit to form. Without that happening, you will get no fruit, and that's what we're going to be looking at. So we do everything we can to encourage pollinators into the orchard, and we want as wide a range as possible living here and frequenting the orchard. So for this pear to be pollinated, bees will have to collect pollen from this pear and transfer it to the pear down there, and the pollen will come from the hessel down there back to this tree, and that will ensure they both get some pollen and therefore they set a crop. But we also encourage an enormous amount of pollination to happen in the hedgerows. So we've got this old hedge here which is full of wildlife, and we've got bluebells and we've got cowslips and all sorts of dandelions growing there which the bees love. We've got this beautiful cherry tree which is laden with blossom and is a real magnet at the moment. And then we've got the new hedgerow and the ditch with the willow, and willow pollen is particularly good for bees because they love collecting it early on in the season. I just want to show you the diversity that we have in this small corner of the orchard and the amount of pollinators that we can attract. This is the wild cherry, which has been here for a long time, and it's fantastic for attracting in the pollinators right now. And then we've got the bramble, which comes into flower later, which is again really useful for pollination insects. And then we've got the willow, which will start to flower soon, in a year or two, and the pollen from that's fantastic. And then lower down we've got woundwort, and we've got on the other side of the ditch that we've created, we have the white dead nettle. And all of this habitat is fantastic forage for such a wide range of bumblebees and honeybees. But not only that, they can nest in amongst these banks in old vole burrows, and we get a lot of nesting bumblebees. So people don't realise how important the bumblebees are. And we've also planted this hedgerow, which will give a huge amount of diversity going forward. All of this has a massive impact on your pollination insects through the summer. Second thing I want to talk about is what we don't do. We don't spray herbicide, for example, weed killer, on the ground. Most people think of orchards quite often as having strips of bare soil. But one of the great benefits of having a regenerative approach is that you armour the soil with permanent cover crops. And in our case, that's a mixture of naturally occurring grasses and things like this nettle, which most people would be quite scared of. Wherever the nettle occurs, we tend to find we get much healthier plant growth. And it allows us to really encourage all sorts of additional flowers. So for example, we can grow things like this celandine, which spreads gradually in older orchards, and it attracts in such a wide range of pollinators, particularly the two-winged flies and the small hoverflies, which are very important. So in our orchard management, we don't have a spray program, and we don't spray chemicals on the flowers or on the leaves or on the stems. And as a result of not spraying these chemicals, it really has a benefit to the amount of pollinators that we get. So we don't spray blossom thinning agents, we don't spray growth regulators, we don't spray fungicides for fungal problems like canker and powdery mildew. We don't spray anti-mite chemicals for blister mite, for example, and we don't spray insecticides for codling moth or aphids. We don't spray any of those. And as a result of not spraying, we have a huge impact on the population of pollinators because they all have a large impact on the life of the pollinators in the orchard, either directly or indirectly. And most people don't realise that orchards have a very long season-wide spray program. We don't need any of that here. So you might think because we're not spraying our orchard with all of these chemicals, we would get lots of problems. But in fact, we don't get these problems because we manage the orchard in a completely regenerative way. And that gives a much healthier tree and a very high yield. And as a result, we have a much healthier population of pollinators. The third thing I want to talk about that we do for pollinators is how we manage the orchard in terms of pruning and spacing. We have this narrow canopy system, and you can see on this pear how the blossom is presented in a very narrow column shape, and that allows easy access for all sorts of pollinators into the tree. They don't have to search very far, and also for them to be able to fly down the rows. So honeybees, for example, do like to fly in straight lines. Hoverflies don't, and bumblebees tend not to, but wherever they want to fly in a straight line, they can just follow the row. And that cross-pollination that we need to achieve is much easier with this narrow canopy system. So hopefully from this video you've been able to see that there are things that you can do to improve pollination, because globally pollination and pollinating insects is becoming a big issue, particularly with the action of pesticides, which have a huge impact on bee populations, and colony collapse is quite common. By growing things in a regenerative way and improving the habitats and running the orchard in the way that we do, we've enabled pollinators to live here and breed successfully and increase our yield.